This is Charlie Rose.
Paul Thomas Anderson is here. His movies include Boogie Nights, Magnolia, and Punch Drunk Love. His latest is There Will Be Blood. He adapted it from Oil, Upton Sinclair's 1927 novel. It tells a rough and tumble tale of a wildcatter looking for oil, the big strike. David Denby of The New Yorker calls it an enthralling and powerfully eccentric American epic. Also joining me, Daniel Day-Lewis, who stars in the film. He plays Daniel Plainview. Here is the trailer for the film.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I say I'm an oil man, you will agree. I've traveled across half our state to be here and to see about this land. I'm a family man. This is my son and my partner, H.W. Plainview.
You boys are a regular family business.
You boys are a little late.
What'd you find?
I found some interesting prospects. I have many wells flowing at many thousand barrels per day. I can guarantee to start drilling and to put up the cash to back my word. What's this? Why don't I own this? Why don't I own this? I'm prepared to give you $3,700.
No. We have oil here. That's worth something.
What would you like, Eli?
My son is a healer and a vessel for the Holy Spirit. He has a church.
Oh.
You will be cast up and thrust back to perdition.
We build a pipeline and we do a deal with Union Oil. Then we're making money. We're making the real money that we should be making. There's a whole ocean of oil under our feet. No one can get at it except for me.
We'll offer $1 million for full title.
When do we get our money, Daniel?
I look at people and I see nothing worth liking.
Say
I
this
broke
to me.
you and I beat you. I see the worst in people.
We have a sinner with us.
Get out of here, devil!
I have a competition in me. I want no one else to succeed.
I am pleased to have both Paul Thomas Anderson and Daniel Day-Lewis here. Welcome. Great to see you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
When did you start, in your mind, as you wrote this script, think about Daniel as Daniel?
Early, but I didn't want to grab onto the thought and keep thinking this is who I'm writing it for, because that I didn't know Daniel. I didn't want to make presumptions about him or anything like that. I'd just seen his films, and I obviously respected him as an actor. I thought, well, that's the Holy Grail if you can get to it. But I tried to just quite honestly sort of dash those hopes and really just try to write well and write this man. But that said, it kept coming and coming and coming, that the only man for the job would be Daniel if he decided he would want to do it.
Well, I mean, some writers will say it's easier to write a character if you have in mind someone whose abilities
and I've done that before, and it's worked out really well, but I was writing differently, and it was all coming together so differently. I tried to not apply a face to it exactly, but that said, it's kind of a trick. You have to trick yourself, too, because you're trying to write this man, not really write it like it's going to be somebody who's going to play it. I don't know.
It's a little bit different from the book, and the book is really about sort of capitalism and politics and socialism. Mm-hmm. Here, the twin themes are religion and business, right? Mm-hmm. How did you get there to that point?
When I found the book, it was about 6 or 7 years ago. So, obviously, not living in a bubble, and there's a lot of things going on. And being from California, not that far from the oil fields, right. Bakersfield, and the kind of curiosity about what the hell is this stuff, and how do they get it out of the ground?
It's a great American story.
It is a great. It's
great
irresistible,
yeah.
and but Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you get a script. Do you read it immediately?
Yeah, because it came from him.
Did you say to yourself, "Can I be that Daniel? Can I do this?"
Well, that question mark lurks somewhere. But when things are working right, you feel yourself irresistibly drawn into the orbit of a hitherto unknown world. So the question mark it's kind of a false question because it's already asked too late, in a way.
When you ask it, you're already there.
I'm gone. Yeah. Yeah, I packed my bags. Yeah, not without a certain degree of trepidation. But yeah, I packed my bag.
Even at this stage, you see a character and you
well,
fear?
I didn't know where it was going to go. I mean, like Paul said, when he's writing it, you know, to write it with me in mind is kind of misleading because I certainly believe, I think Paul has it in common with all good writers that to some extent, it feels to me as if those characters are so alive already, even just only on the page, that he has begun to inhabit the world that he's creating and to see that world through the eyes of those characters so that they're revealing themselves somehow. And that, I suppose, is very similar to the way which we work. So the decisions are kind of taken away from you, which is a blessing, really, because the whole notion that you kind of create a body out of bits of old lumber and, you know, a few memories and this, you know, kind of like a bric-a-brac shop of, you know, emotional...
Wolf dust. Wolf dust.
Wolf dust. You know, if that's the truth of it, I don't want to know that that's the truth. I prefer to kid myself that there's some kind of mystery about it.
Yeah. You had to go raise the money, or somebody did. You know, it was not easy in this case because... You know,
they took one look at the two of us and said, "No, I don't think so." Digging holes and no.
And then he says, "Well, you won't see any dialogue for the first 20 minutes." I can see some studio executives saying, "What?" And then you say, "Well," and there are no women in this movie either, by the way.
Yeah, that went well. No, they definitely made
And then you say, "My lead is going to be in every scene."
That's right. They definitely made us feel for a while that they wanted us to come over to dinner, but then they really let us know that they didn't want us to take care of their kids and that we couldn't sleep over.
Could Kate Blanchett play Eli, maybe?
Well, it's happened before. If you can play Dylan, you can play Eli.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to find somebody that's as mad as you are, and there is somebody, you know there's someone out there.
There's some executive as mad as you are.
And he came in there, I won't say.
Yeah.
Who was that?
Well, the great thing that happened was that my agent stopped being an agent and went to run a film studio. So I said, "You're on the
there
hook."
you go. Paramount Advantage.
So once in a lifetime opportunity. That movie you've been trying to sell, you own it.
You own it. We're into it. But it gave you guys a time to collaborate, did it not?
It did. I mean, quite honestly, the first time we tried to get the money for the movie, we didn't really know what we were doing. There were so many variables about how you shoot down a mine shaft and building the derrick and where we would shoot and all this sort of stuff that we actually had a figure that was higher just because we didn't know. And so in all fairness to those places that said no, get out of here, you know, we did need to go back to the drawing board. We needed more time to research and get it all sorted. Lots of things happened in a year. Babies were born, backs were broken, things, and it was good. And when we met back up, we knew what we could do it for. So it all ended up working out.
Now, while he's out doing this, are you getting ready for the role?
Yeah, my own quiet way. Yeah.
What's your own quiet way?
Well, I spend many months in apparently listless rumination, out of which I hope something will emerge.
You're waiting for somebody to speak to you? Or?
I think I am, actually. I mean, for all that there's obvious work to be done, the most fascinating part of the work is the work that you have absolutely no control over whatsoever. That's the part of the work that frays your nerves, because you don't know if that life will reveal itself to you in any way that you can absorb it, digest it.
But you do, you and I have had lots of conversations about acting before at this table, but you went out and did familiarize yourself with the kinds of tools that
yes
they do, so that you know what they feel like in their hands.
Yeah, I mean, how long does
rock.
it take to pick up a pickaxe and start hammering?
So this was one day?
I mean, one of the great advantages about you discover Plainview in a state of primitive existence, which he would have shared with anybody else that, you know, that set themselves on that course. I mean, there's nothing, you learn as you go along. They were learning as they went along. You buy the tools, you buy a donkey if you've got enough money. You probably, if you can find a partner, that's okay, but otherwise you just do it on your own and you make it up as you go along. And even that when you see him at the beginning, he's a silver prospector, but then the whole oil thing, you know, before you get into the industrialization of oil production, it's really just the process of scooping it out of the ground, where it emerges naturally into pools with buckets and saucepans and, you know. So
what's interesting about the movie, we'll see a little bit of this in a moment, you know, you really want to capture that feeling of labor and of physicality, yes? Mm-hmm. Tell me how you saw that. And how, you know?
Well, it was great. It was great reading about some of these stories of these men doing this work, but it was hard to wrap your mind around. You know, thinking about what are they talking? They would describe these contraptions that they worked with in a 50-foot eucalyptus tree trunk that they had shaped and everything else. And it was kind of like science fiction a little bit. You know, it was that kind of bizarre, and you try to draw it out and think, what the hell are they talking about? How were they doing this stuff? And that is what Daniel said. You know, it's just how exciting it was to start building this stuff from the ground up and watching these guys work and the labor of it is really exciting, because I guess that's always a question. It's like, what is this stuff and how do you get it up and out of the ground? I mean, that was a really good question.
And you wanted to show that.
Yeah.
What does a derrick look like, and how do you build them? And
how do you do it?
And what happens if they catch on fire?
Yeah,
all of that.
How do you put it out?
And how do you put it out?
Yeah,
with explosives.
Well, you got to take the oxygen away, so you go through dynamite it. You know, and that's the idea that you cave it in. But it was so funny. I mean, that was the great thing. We were so desperate to be accurate about things, and well, there's rotary rigs and cable tool rigs, and we're shooting this year and everything. But there's a certain point where this sort of old guy Jim Farmer, this oil expert, he hang around. He was like, I got to tell you guys, there is no one way to do this. Whatever gets it out of the ground or whatever puts that fire out, there is no manual, you know, for this kind of work. It was really liberating, because we were like, all right, great, you know, let's go to work.
You shot it where?
Outside Marfa, Texas.
Yeah, where they shoot a lot of movies, it seems like.
It turns out.
Was Giant shot there?
Giant was shot there.
And then Tommy Lee Jones's movie, No Country for... Was that shot there?
The Coen brothers were in town.
One of theirs? Is that right?
Well, the town wasn't big enough for the both of us.
That's not a two-crew town. No.
Tell me who Daniel is, this character that drives this movie.
Oh, boy. Where would I begin?
Well, anywhere. Just, you know.
Well, I'm kind of the worst person to ask in a way, because you're kind of inviting me to objectify him in a way that I haven't even begun to try and do.
Yet.
No, not yet. But I suppose, to put it another way, he'd have in common the experience of having to transform himself from the savagery of everyday life as a kind of bottom feeder prospector who's going to try and get just enough crude ore out of one hole in the ground to maybe get himself another lease in which he might find a little bit more, and gradually sort of build his way towards this unimaginable wealth that was promised to them all. But those that were lucky enough, those that weren't broken and beaten by the experience, and they were lucky enough to make some money, they transformed themselves from savages into showmen in a way. It's like a showman. you know, he's got his snakebite remedy and he's going to sell that whatever way he can from town to town. And for a man that's lived in silence in holes in the ground for maybe years, he's now got to find a voice and a silver tongue that's going to convince people to turn their pockets inside out and invest in him as a man of irrefutable wisdom. And
how did you find, as an actor, his voice? I mean, the voice, the physicality of the voice that you used?
Well, luckily for me, there are no recordings from the period, so no one can say for sure that they just didn't talk like that. So that left me with the imagination and freedom, and we listened to quite a lot of recordings, which Paul managed to find for me from the Dust Bowl years, some from Oklahoma, some from Fond du Lac, where Plainview came from, and I couldn't really find anything in those, except maybe just a clue here and there. But over a period of time, I began to, you know, when you were asking me about how, you know, I like things to take time because, again, I like to kid myself into thinking that I can hear that voice before I try and make the sound of it, that I can hear it as we can sometimes hear our own voices before we speak. And then there's the problem of trying to let it out.
Well, is it easier to find it in your head, or is it easier to duplicate what you hear?
Well, it begins with hearing it, and then, yeah, it's not always a straightforward thing because sometimes when it comes out of your mouth, I made lots of little recordings for Paul.
You send them off to him?
On tapes that conform to no known formats whatsoever.
How was it to watch him create a character that you had written? I mean, because you said an amazing thing. He doesn't want me to flatter him, and I won't too much, but it is the notion of, some people say, how does he do it? And you said, how could you not do it that way? Mm-hmm. You know?
Well, the good thing, quite honestly, is that the majority of the work that Daniel and I did was long distance. So it's
He's in Ireland, you're in L.A.
Yeah, and so it's still a bit of a mystery to me. And I don't really want to know exactly what he was up to in his room late at night, you know, with his tape recorder.
Or with his tools.
With his tools, yeah. Because I don't want to peek behind the curtain, really. I want to know a little bit. I want to be there to provide for him and collaborate with him and talk.
Yeah, but you must have talked about it a lot. I mean, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you had a chance to collaborate, and you know. It is legendary how he prepares for a role. He's talked about it. And yet, you know, he has said about his own approach to acting that this character had a fever for money and gold and oil and success. And you shared with him the fever you had for acting. Right?
Yes. Yeah, yes, I'm not sure if the fever is for acting or the fever is really just for... I suppose that's what it comes down to.
But what else would it be?
The idea of exploring the world through with an entirely different experience to your own, which doesn't automatically mean that you have to make a film or create a piece of theatre to do that. It's the most obvious way to do it. But the curiosity, I mean, it sustained me so happily for the 2 years that we were working together and throughout the period of shooting, and certainly didn't then kind of shut off like a faucet the moment we stopped working. It's still there working away in a way. The work becomes an end in itself, and I think that's also true of you know, if you compare that fever to the fever of prospecting, that those guys that thought they knew what they were after, which is the vast mansion on the Pacific coast, by the time they had accumulated enough wealth to build that pyramid for themselves, the work was actually an end in itself. The fever was the thing that they lived for.
The process. And
Yes, absolutely, regardless of who's a witness to it, or to what extent you can display the you know, the rewards of that life in any visible way.
In creating the film, what is it you want? I mean, what are you, as the filmmaker, wanting to accomplish here other than telling a good story?
The joy of collaboration with, you know, with people that you really love and you like being around, you like playing with. It's really pleasurable work to do when it's going well. There's just really nothing better.
This went well.
It did. It did, but I'm the wrong person to ask because I think everything is a fantastic experience. Everybody looks back and they're like, you are insane, you know?
Here's a scene. Take a look at this, and this will explain a lot, or show a lot of what we're talking about.
The Lord has sent this man here, Eli. Yes, I believe he has. My offer to you is $3,700.
What is it that brought you here, sir?
The good Lord's guidance. Now, of course, within
About
that,
our
we're
oil.
going to develop a lease. What's that?
What about our oil?
What about it?
We have oil here. That's worth something.
Oh, do you have someone who can drill for it? Do you think there's oil here?
I know there is.
Oh, it's very expensive to drill. To get it up and out of the ground. You ever tried that before?
How much is it?
Costly.
Well, our oil sits right up on top of the ground.
I believe that's called seepage. Doesn't necessarily mean there's anything underneath.
What would you give us for it?
I don't know.
Something you don't know.
That's right. What would you like, Eli?
$10,000.
For what?
For my church.
That's good. That's a good one. Well, if we decide to drill for oil, and if the well begins to produce, I'll give your church a $5,000 signing.
$10,000.
Do you want to find someone else that's going to come up here and drill, Eli? Make the investment and do all the hard work that goes into it? I can just as easily hunt for quail on another ranch as I can here, so no, I'll happily be a supporter of your church for as long as I can. For the bonus only. Now, as it happens, I do have some connections in the drilling business who might help get us started. How do you feel about this, Abel?
Yes, what Eli says.
Well, good. Let's draw up some contracts and let's give it a try. Appreciate your help with this, Eli.
We see there the other central character, Eli. Who is he?
He's played by Paul Dano, and he's the preacher, the town preacher.
He represents the religion that's a stream in this movie.
Yeah.
And his father, his family, has a little piece of property that
They have a little chunk of land. Yeah, and they have oil. Yeah.
And he wants to build a church.
Yeah. Or rebuild it, or add on to the one that he's got.
Now, have we, right there at that moment, do we see this competition that's going to inflow because Eli seems to be a strong character. He seems to be someone who has a sense, he's almost a mirror image. He feels about the church the way Daniel feels about money. No?
Well, as far as Plainview's concerned, he recognizes the fraudulence of its posture immediately. And I dare say, to recognize that, you have to probably have a certain degree of self-hatred. So he probably knows that that Eli has the measure of him too.
So they know they're in a game.
I think so, yeah.
And they both know each other is part fraud.
Well, I wouldn't have allowed myself to think that he could see that in me, but I would certainly have seen it in him. Yes, yes.
But doesn't he see it because he knows you're a salesman?
Eli knows. Yeah.
He knows.
Yeah.
You know that you're going to say what you can do to get that land.
But you see, my fraudulence, as far as I'm concerned, would have a certain nobility to it, whereas his spiritual fraudulence is no excuse for that, is
there? Here's what's interesting about this: you don't want to let this character go. I mean,
no.
Am I right?
You're right. Yeah.
Because what?
He started it.
I know he did. He should never have read that book. So why can't you let him go? Because it...
he makes me laugh.
You like him?
I like him.
You like him? What do you like about him?
I'd have to go back to the beginning and say what I liked when I met him in the form of Paul's script is that it seemed an entirely honest examination of a life to me. I loved that about it, and I don't know where it came from. I didn't want to know. It seemed to come from probably a very unconscious place, but there seemed to be great truth in it, in the outrageous trajectory of that man's life. I can't explain it, and I still feel the same way about it.
What's the outrageous trajectory of his life? I mean, he's there in a hole. When we first see him, he's in a hole with one pick trying to find some silver. And then at the end, which we can't describe, he's in his huge house.
Yes. Well, I suppose the separation as he separates himself further and further and further from humanity, and I don't want to kind of give the game away, but he makes the final gesture at the end of his life, in effect. I mean, in quenching that last spark of his own soul, which is already shredded by his experiences. He makes the last final gesture of separation from the world, I feel. Is that right?
It is.
Yeah, it is, yeah. You know, I know politicians who people have written about, and they have said they went out to conquer politics, and politics conquered them.
Mm-hmm. We thought a good subtitle for the movie would be, you can take the boy out of the mine shaft, but you can't take the mine shaft out of the boy.
Your former agent wouldn't buy that.
Yeah, they didn't like
a moment, would he? Because I'm intrigued by, just as he loved the process, Daniel, the life he'd lived and the competition. I mean, where does competition like that come from?
It's primal. It's primal.
You're born with it or not?
I think so. I mean, I think Daniel's experiences before we meet him certainly might have sharpened the edge of his ambition. But yeah, I think that competition is something that's in his origins. Yeah.
And you?
And me, I don't share that with him, no. I might have had a sort of less discriminating ambition when I was younger. I don't know. I think young people do tend to wish to make a mark of some kind, whatever it might be. My ambition now, it's not the same thing as competition, is it? I don't set myself... Competition implies that you set yourself in opposition to another man or another group of men or women, but I don't feel that. I mean, I suppose my competition has most often been with myself.
I was going to say that.
Yeah.
You're competing with perfection or with yourself.
Well, not perfection. Let's not be hasty.
Or that's the...
Yeah, no, but it's yes, the desire to do something well is still a strong desire in me. I don't know where it comes from. It's something that I don't. It reveals itself in many different ways, and I can be very content, you know, spending time repairing a piece of broken furniture as well as I possibly can. That can fulfill me in the same kind of way. But this particular kind of work, the need to do that, doesn't take me as often as it used to. But when it does, it's with exactly the same fervor, exactly the same wish to try and do something well. I don't know where that...
Your father, maybe?
Maybe.
Father-son, part of the relationship in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a theme that you are unfamiliar with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I remember writing a scene from the book with a 9-year-old boy and his father, and I thought, I'm not writing this again. I'm not writing that. I don't want to do that. But yeah, there you go. Whatever happens, happens.
What is it?
I don't know. It's a good story, you must admit, at the end of the day, you know?
It'll run and run.
It really will, yeah. Get a lot of mileage out of it.
No, I don't think it's mileage as much as it is you are inexorably attracted to it for some reason.
For some reason, yeah.
Which you may not know, or you may know.
A bit of both. I mean, yeah. Definitely a bit of both. Like I said, when I set out, I was trying to write a movie about fighting families, and however it ends up taking this path, there it is. There's brothers fighting. We have some brothers fighting and everything, but at the center of it, is this father and son. Honestly, I remember a fear about wanting to write a part for a 9-year-old boy just being a really practical thing. Feeling like, I don't want to find a 10-year-old boy. That I know that can be difficult to find an actor who's 10 years old who's going to be required to do all this stuff. And the great irony is that we met the most wonderful young man in the west of Texas. His name's Dylan Frazier, who plays Daniel's son. And who did such a terrific job. He was a natural. He'd never seen a film camera before. He's a rodeo rider. He's a real boy of West Texas. The point is, I'm real happy I didn't stop. I didn't stop writing that story just for whatever reason, because
he adds so much to this movie.
Yeah, I got to meet him. Got to know him, and I'm sure glad I didn't stop myself, just because perhaps I'd been near it before.
The physicality of this character and the voice, back to the voice, what does the way he looks play into your imagination?
Well, it has to work this way. It has to work... You have to think about, I suppose, the way in which each of us presents ourselves. Therefore, when you choose the clothes, you're not rummaging through a costumier department. You're trying to imagine that man at his tailor or in the place wherever he got those clothes, making those particular choices. What's he saying about himself? How does he perceive himself? How does he wish to present himself? Just as the voice is the most intimate expression of the very self, so it has to come from a deep expression of ourselves, then so too, to some extent, is the expression of our vanity as well, the way in which we choose to bedeck ourselves with...
When did you, in this process, you've talked about getting the rhythm of a character.
Yes.
When did that happen here? Or does it have a moment?
No, I don't think it does, no. No, that's what frays the nerves, because there is no... apart from anything else, Charlie, I mean, quite obviously it's one thing to work in isolation, which is a great can be a great pleasure in itself. And then there's also the constant communication with Paul, which you know, that small world that we already created for ourselves was tremendously satisfying. And if you do the work you need to do, the chances are that when somebody plants the camera in the ground, that it will feel like the continuation of a life that's already explored. It's not day one of a new experience. But having said that, there's also the reality, the fact that nothing will happen until you collide with these other lives that have been created elsewhere, and you don't know how this.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah,
right.
This man that you feel you've discovered may be completely out of place in the world.
You know what he's talking about?
I know just what he's talking about. Yeah, the first couple of weeks were rough.
Yeah,
but didn't you have a point where, I mean, you had to change actors in part? I don't know whether that's what you're talking about, but you had to change actors because it wasn't.
That's not what he's talking about. But yes, and even without the change of the actor, just finding footing in general for the first couple of weeks is tough for everybody. But
so the making of the movie has as much rhythm as the rhythm of the character itself.
Sure, yeah.
There was one where Paul was very sweet about it, but in the first week, I didn't want to see any dailies. I sometimes I do, and this I just didn't want to, and that was that. But after a couple of days of work, Paul said, I think you should see something. So I went to see something with him, and the scene that we reshot, in fact, we kind of found a different way to do it, and it was a blessing. But I saw the scene. Is that what it is? Is that what it's going to be? That's not going to work. That's just not going to. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't it felt like one was radically off course, but in fact, the correction was something that was, you know, relatively.
Yeah.
Wait, what's the correction?
Well, the correction, there's a few minor corrections that had to happen. And, one thing that Daniel said that I think was great, too, is that I had him look at what we had done, because we all needed to collect ourselves after a week or whatever it had been to say, it's not exactly what it should be. I'm not quite sure how to say exactly what it should be, so I have no good direction to give.
You said that to him?
Yeah. That was the understanding of what was going on.
You didn't have to say it.
And from my perspective, I'm looking at it thinking, well, the scene's not really written exactly right. So for starters, that needs to help as a stepping stone, because if there's a problem, it generally begins with the writing. So I have to make that correction. Daniel had to make a little correction, just to the left, a little to the right, and ideally.
Can you tell me what you did? How you corrected?
No.
Because you don't know, or you don't share?
No, I don't know. I was glad of a chance. I was appalled to, you know, to see, and because I realized, I mean, I was already too far down the line, which is one of the grave.
This is great. So all of a sudden, after 2 years, you have built this character. You have inhabited this character.
Who the holy Jesus is that? And where are we going to?
How is that
build a world around that?
Yeah. And you both felt at the same time.
But I think
it turns out it was just a calibration rather than a shift.
Rather than a rebuild.
Yeah.
I think I did also, quite honestly, because necessarily you have to allow this life to help tell the story in a way that's, you know, at least substantially unconscious, if not entirely. So, you know, to be confronted, but you see to what degree you're out on a limb, and that's a shocking thing. And you may well decide you have to stay out on that limb, but you still, it brings it home to you that that's where you are.
And if you have to stay on the limb, it's going to be a lot harder, isn't it? But you have said in talking about character that and acting that you have to sort of you have to take a lot of discipline, and you have to get the framework. But you also have to free the animal instinct in order to make it work.
Yeah, it always sounds, but how do you ever talk about that thing without making it sound kind of grotesquely self-important? I mean,
well, it's not grotesquely self-important. It is glaringly real. You know, that somehow that is the work of art. Am I? Or is that taking it too seriously in your judgment?
No. I'm the wrong person to ask.
Well, what are you here for? What is it you know?
Something you don't know?
That's right.
What would you like?
No. Well, exactly. What do you like, Daniel? What is it you would like? How did you two end up at the end of this? I mean, what kind of relationship do you have at the end of this experience?
Well, it doesn't feel like it's ended.
Yeah, it's one that didn't allow easily for the brutal separation when somebody says, that's it, you can't do anything else here, you better go away. And so it was hard, it was very hard.
But I thought you couldn't release the character, but you're saying I couldn't release the friendship that had developed and the collaboration having experienced this sort of mountain climb together.
That too, yes, absolutely. Both of them, both those things. Both being part of the same thing.
I feel just the same way, yeah. It's good to have a partner in crime, though, that you're going down in flames with, just to have the sadness of finishing something, you know? It's wallowing in a little bit together.
But Paul said it earlier when he was, I forget an answer to which question, but when you were talking about playing, and, and it's, just to kind of put something in the balance a little bit, it's so important to remind yourself, I mean, you're never that far away from absurdity in your working. And maybe the more, as you grow older, you become more and more aware of the absurdity, and therefore you have to take your work that much more seriously to obscure that sense of it. But you are on a playground. Paul created a playground when he wrote that thing, and then chose the location, and Jack Fisk built the sets, and it was one huge playground in which we merrily played with a group of, like-minded people for a period of time. It's hard to give that up.
I can imagine, and especially because of the panorama of it all, too.
Yeah. Just the venue in general.
The venue and outside, and this is not closed little sets for the most part.
No, we had one bizarre day where we had to come back in California and go onto a soundstage just for some inserts and a thing that didn't end up making the film. And we were miserable, all of us, the entire crew, Daniel, everyone. We more or less turned around and walked right out. We said, well, let's go back home. Somewhere else. Get out of here.
Talk to me about music.
Johnny Greenwood did the score and
Radiohead.
From Radiohead.
Never composed a film in his life before.
Not a proper film. No, what I mean is he did an experimental film for the BBC, and it was just him able to do what he wanted to do. But I think the excitement for him here was, I remember him seeing the film for the first time. He kind of bounded across the room. He's like, I just have to write music to the story. That's all I have to do, right? And I thought, yeah, if that's what you think you have to do. He said, yeah, I just write it to the story. And he came back with pieces that he'd name, so I obviously knew what he was thinking. He'd named, a piece HW or Prospectors Arrive. Just thinking about bits and pieces from the film and just composed.
And how are they different from any other scoring?
How are they different from any of the
scoring of a movie that you've had, other movies you've made?
It was a very different approach to how I'd done it before.
Yeah.
But great, but that much more exciting. To get. It was actually very similar to the way in which Daniel and I had a relationship early on when he was in Ireland and I was in California. And Johnny just communicating. He was in Oxford, I was in New York at the time, and kind of going away and coming back and sharing things, and it was great because I could never over direct, which is a really good feeling because best to let him to his own devices and gentle suggestions here and there, but that's kind of how it worked.
Yeah. We said geography is at work here, the outdoors. It's also the West. Tell me, you've thought about the West and the infinite possibilities. I mean, because that's at the heart of what Daniel is about, too. Beyond competition, it is moving on to...
Yes, it's the false promise of the horizon, yeah.
False promise.
Well, yes, because you arrived there, and of course the world is round.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, and all the joy or whatever. Do you think people like that think it's going to be joyful at the end, that somehow they're going to arrive and it's going to be a Garden of Eden and everything they thought is going to be that way, or that somehow you're corrupted by the process? So when you get there, you instantly know there is no Garden of Eden. It simply served a purpose for me to keep charging.
Well, yeah, I think that's you know, sound way of looking at it. It's hard to imagine anybody that began. I mean, they more or less had each one of them would have had similar origins. It's hard to imagine that if they survived those early experiences, that they would then have been able to really appreciate the you know, whatever wealth that came their way.
Is H.W. your son in this? There's this wonderful scene at the end. What's going to happen to him?
Oh, he's going to be fine.
That's what I thought, because he is bought a different way.
Thank God I have none of you in me.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, in a strange way. And again, I don't want to kind of... But in a strange way, Plainview releases him. For all that he's sort of... He does it in the cruelest and most destructive way. But he releases him, perhaps.
Because he recognizes that he has no choice?
Well, because H.W. can go on his way knowing that he's his own man.
And he knows that the road taken is better than the other road taken.
Yeah. But you see that he's growing up straight, and maybe that's in itself hard as your own blood curdles and becomes venom in your own veins, to see something that's so growing up so straight and pure. That's a hard reflection.
But what was hard for you? I mean, you know, you create these characters, and you know, we've talked, and you are always hesitant to talk about how much of self you pour into a character.
Well, I'm only hesitant because I don't know. But
you risk more than anybody I know. Am I right?
Yes.
He risks more of the fragility of self in creating character. You've never seen anything like this before? I just want you to grab it. I'm not going to have a question. You know, because it is unique in terms of at least the depth. You know. In fact, I think Jim Sheridan once said, you know, that you come closer to the obliteration of self than anybody.
Well, I dare say that finally, I mean, I suppose that's... It would be true in all forms of creativity that is the that's a very it's a narcotic, I suppose.
You don't want to be on stage, or not?
I'm not sure that I don't want to be. I mean, I can only look at the evidence. I haven't been for so long. Exactly. I have to, I guess, assume that I don't want to be. But some part of me wonders if I might do that again at some point. You know, I don't know. I have very, very happy memories of working in the theatre. Some of the happiest, in fact. But I'm not sure if I would ever be allowed to work in the way that gave me that kind of pleasure. It becomes more complicated later on. You know, the joy of the theatre, in a way, is the kind of obscurity of it. You don't want it to become a circus. But no, I don't know. I don't know.
But I think that's a yes, because he's thinking about it, don't you?
No, I think about it. Yeah.
I do. Yeah, I hope I'm right there. I hope I'm right there to help out.
I mean, there was that moment with Hamlet, and you thought of your father. Yes.
I had the strongest impression on that particular night that I was in a dialogue with my dead father. But that wasn't what stopped me from going back on stage again. I was really just, I was just exhausted. And now looking back on it, like whenever we reach what we think are the boundaries of our endurance, you know, 10 minutes later you're thinking, I could have done, you know, like in any athletic this year, I could have gone further than that, I could have jumped higher. So now I kind of, it seems so strange to think that one might have that impression that you'd reached the limit of your endurance at a given moment. But quite honestly, I was sort of beyond caring. I was just beyond caring in that moment. I'd done it enough. I couldn't do it anymore. I'd done it for 8 months. I'd lived with the part for 8 months. I didn't perform it every night, but we did it sort of, you know, 3 performances here, 2 there, you know, a week of matinee days. But, you know, I'd lived with it for 8 months, and it was, I guess, that on that particular night, something inside me just wouldn't do it again.
But may.
Well, not that particular, but...
No, not Hamlet. He is, despite the movies, despite the directing success, is at heart a writer. Yes?
As well as the other things, yeah. He certainly is a writer,
But at
yes.
core, he's a writer.
Yes, I think so. Yes,
Don't
he
you?
is. Yes.
I think so,
I
yeah.
think he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
he
that's
is.
the ultimate.
I like
truth.
saying that best.
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Because you like being a writer, or because it is what you enjoy the most, so therefore if that's how we define you, then so much the better.
Both of those things. And it goes back to what we talked about before. It begins and it ends with the writing. That if it's good, directing is easy. Directing can be easy. But directing can be really difficult if the writing's not right. So it's just that idea that it begins and ends with the writing. Yeah, and honestly, then it goes back to what we talked about before, is how much was I thinking of Daniel at the beginning? I mean, I must have been thinking about him a lot, secretly, because I think that's how I did a pretty good job writing. I thought, well, if I'm going to go to him, I better get my act straight. I better have this well written by the time I knock on his door.
And I should take note of the fact that this film has received already, in different people, nominations, or people are talking about Best Actor, Best Director, Best Film, all of those kinds of things. They're taking what is essentially a low-budget film compared to all the big epics and created a grand story, a story of religion and the drive for money and power and so many other stories. What comes out of this for me, in the end, we can all watch the movie on the screen and see your work together, but what I sense here is that 2 people who've been on this journey who realize that somehow it was unique and special, and you wonder, how will it be the next time out when we may not be together? Am I right?
Certainly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Thank
Great
you.
to see you.
It's lovely to talk to you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.